Hey guys, it's Coffeeyay. I'm here with Martin. We're just doing some hand history reviews today. Just want to kind of give you an idea of the kind of hand history review that I think can be very beneficial to your game. Really going in depth with hands, analyzing lines, and trying to figure out, what the max EV play is. This is something I do a lot in my one-on-one sessions, but it is something you can do on your own. Here I'm just using PT4, using the hand history replayer tool. I think it's a really good tool. I think it works basically just as well as taping video. The only thing you miss is timing tells. And what's really nice about PT4 is you can actually go into the options and set it to show HUD stat values at time of hand. That way you can really feel like you're in the game and you can analyze the decisions you made based on the stats you had and not, retroactively apply reads that you didn't have. And so now we can see the HUD for what it is. We can see the HUD stats that came into this game. And so we know that we've played previous games up to this one. We know we have some reads already. And so let's quickly just glance over at some of these reads. First of all, we can see that so far in small blind, villain has been tight. We can see that by the green color immediately just by looking at it. The sample size has been decently large, so we know that that's, quite a tight read. We should be quite careful versus villain's min raise. On the other hand, he does limp a lot, and he does limp trap, so that makes it not quite so certain what exactly he's min raising. He could still be min raising some weakish hands and just limping the top, because we know he's limp trapped us before. I think likely his min raising range is still on the strong side. I think it contains a lot of ace X and things like that. I think he's still probably limp trapping some hands, but probably not all the top of his range. You can see that he does still limp fold. So versus a player like this, one of the most important things is to avoid shoving over limps deep. It's going to be really bad if they have almost any limp trap. That being said, once we get shallower and down in the 16 big blinds, even if they have a 25-30% limp trap fraction, you can still usually get away with shoving quite a lot of weak hands over limps. But for now, I think that, our plan should just be to sort of play fairly default versus limps. Maybe be willing to raise more because he limps so much. And so likely his range has a lot of air in it, even though he does limp trap occasionally. And so that's going to be our plan. And be kind of careful versus min raises. And certainly not 3-bet shove. One thing we sort of know versus min raises is it's very likely we'll get very much fold equity. Even if his range isn't that strong, it's so tight that there just aren't that many hands to fold out in the end. So that should be overall game plan. Obviously, we can still 3-bet shove ace-8 off and stuff like that. But we shouldn't be shoving weak ace-x. We shouldn't be shoving anything fancy like suited stuff. As for his out of position game, so far he's been playing a decent amount of buttons, except deep. It's a little bit of a strange stat to see, to have him play 38%, 17-30, and then every hand after that. But obviously this is a sample size issue. We can see we've only seen 4 hands. And so in the end, I think we should actually lean this towards a tight read, especially since most players tend to be tighter at the shallower depths. So the fact that he's significantly tighter at this deeper depth means that we should likely assume that he's been tighter, but he's just been running good. And we can see that a little bit because he's been 3-betting a lot. If a player has a tight range, they tend to 3-bet their values. So good chance he's just been running good versus us. It's hard to say. We should try to develop more reads, but I would still put sort of a tighter than average read on him, even shallow, despite the HUD stats so far. It's pretty close. All right, so let's just get started. And we can just glance over. We don't have too many post-flop reads yet. All of this is pretty low sample. That's one of the nice things about reviewing hands in PT4 is you can just glance over quickly at the samples, which is obviously something you can do in-game. So it's not, it's still going to help your analysis. And so let's just get started. Martin, do you have any other reads about this guy, Run Away Run? I know it seems you've played him a few times.
I have him marked as age.
Okay.
Because he was so tight.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah. It's interesting. Sometimes these, I found that more often a very tight player is a reg, actually, than a fish. I think it almost takes, like, discipline to play very tight in some sense. And so a lot of these players who play so tight have this sort of system in the back of their mind that, the way to win at poker is tight play. But at the same time, there's a lot of guys, a lot of fish who come from full ring or whatever, and they just play the same ranges they always played, and just, tight. And they play a little bit looser, but it's still tight. So yeah, it's hard to say, but if you have him marked as a fish, we'll just go with that read that he's a tight on the tight side of a fish, and let's just review some hands. All right, so I think ace-6 suited is already sort of really close to a 3-bet shove, especially considering our reads. I certainly shove this readless, and I think in this case it's still good enough to shove readless, but I think it's not a bad spot to adjust to our reads and flat it. I would certainly shove it over a limp. We know that he limps a lot. We'll get a ton of fold equity, and he might still limp call us with like queen jack and stuff. So it's not like we're always behind. But here I think it's very close. I think shoving and flatting are probably going to be very similar in expectation. But yeah, readless I would just be shoving. As played, again, it's pretty close. I wouldn't mind a flat here, but shove's absolutely fine.
Well, the problem here is that his first hand might not is not popped up in game.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't know how exact stance.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's an issue with all HUDs. It's not just the coffee HUD, and it's not just PT4. It's just getting that first hand for some reason is significantly harder. The only place they're able to do it is Zoom, but it has a completely different feature. I've read a lot about how they can't get that first hand. It can be very frustrating though. But you're absolutely right. So yeah, we essentially are readless the first hand if we don't have any specific notes. So yeah, well played. And again, like I still think it's well played, even if we had this read. Like ace-6 suited is strong enough that we can basically always shove it, and it's fine. I think that the only one that we can start arguing quite a lot for reads is like stuff like ace-2 suited, ace-3 suited, ace-4 suited, where I shove that readless, but I think these are enough reads to probably not shove it. Similar maybe to ace-7 off. That's another hand I shove readless, but maybe versus this guy we'd flat it. Just that very bottom border. And so this is just going to be a fold. This is actually pretty close to a call readless. I still fold it readless, but it's close. And if we have any reads that, again, if we're expanding our border, if people tend, if we have a read that villain 3-bet shoves lighter than average, we should be calling this. But obviously in this case, our reads tend to be that he's on the tight side. So well played. All right, a6 off. So this is a hand I would just flat readless. It's actually not that great shove expectation. Significantly worse than the suited ones. And yeah, an ace-7 is really a good cutoff for what you should be 3-bet shoving readless.
What would you do if he limped?
If he limped, I shove. I just shove over limps with those ace-X. I find that...
Strikes?
What's that?
Even though he strikes some hands as this like that.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't know still how many hands he traps. And again, like, even though he traps a third of hands, notice that, first of all, there's less combos of, like, trapping hands when we do have an ace. It's much less likely he has ace-king or whatever. I also find that a lot of players tend to trap more, maybe pocket pairs, even king-X hands. It's not always the big ace-X that they're trapping, or even weak ace-X. I find a lot of trapped weak ace-X. And so oftentimes, I mean, it just doesn't end up mattering. Like, our equity is still okay when we get it in anyways. And with ace-X, it's nice because if he has queen-jack or he has king-queen, we're still ahead. And ace-X obviously just plays really poorly post. It is close given the fact that he does limp trap. I think you're absolutely right. It does make a strong argument for checking back, especially with some of the maybe very weakest ace-X, like ace-2, ace-3, ace-4, which I certainly shove readless, but maybe versus this guy, you're right. But again, I mean, we have a pretty small sample on his limp trap. He's only done it 1 out of 3 times. So it's still a little bit hard to say. I don't think we should adjust too much, but we certainly shouldn't shove any like king X or anything else. But I think we can still get away with shoving a lot of that ace-6. So here we min raise, and this is absolutely fine. And we get 3-bet, and yeah, we should be flatting. Obviously, we are facing a strong range. The readless 3-bet not all in range is strong. It does contain a lot of big pocket pairs, decent amount of like big ace-X and stuff, but our hand just peels so well. We are getting quite good odds. If you look, Nice PT4 gives you some of these equities. In terms of direct pot odds, all we need is 30%. And, we definitely will just hit 30% of flops hard enough to get it in. Combined with the fact that we can semi-bluff sometimes, we'll get some implied odds as well. There will be flops where we can stack him. So this is absolutely fine. And obviously this is a great flop for us. Now, how we proceed here is pretty close. If we have some read that villain is very aggressive and barrels, I think that flatting here is absolutely fine. Especially if we have a read that villain tends to 3-bet not all in with a lot of a more polar range. If there's a decent amount of trash in his range and stuff like that, then he's much more likely to fire turns because his range is so weak. And also we get less value. I think in this case we should shove for value. I think it's a spot where it's quite a good chance where we're actually stacking him with his ace X. Like, I think a lot of players will call it off here with ace king, ace queen, even stuff like king queen stuff. So at that point, we just get so much value. We should just shove. Obviously, we are behind queens, kings, aces, but that's not that big a part of his range, especially combinatorically. So I would just shove here for value. Again, we also get value from flush draws. Some I guess random 7-8. I mean, people do 3-bet connected hands somewhat. Probably not that much readless, but we do get some value out of that. Uh, and there are still hands like tens and nines and eights that he's still calling it off with. So I think we just have enough value here, especially versus this kind of versus a fish who's likely on the tight passive side. It's not like we're going to induce him bluffing on future streets, and it's not like we can really fold on future streets either. So future streets aren't going to really help us, even though we're in position. I think a lot of the time we can flat here because we have position, but considering that he's likely going to be passive, we have a lot of value in the spot versus his current range. There are a lot of hands that we're quite far ahead that, are probably calling us. Again, like ace king, ace queen, ace 10 even maybe, that I think we should just shove. Do you have any thoughts on the spot? I think this can be sort of a confusing spot for a lot of players. They flat their hand because they're sort of told to, and then they face a spot where you hit the nuts, but you still feel kind of gross getting it in because obviously you get shown down queens, kings, aces here as well. What do you think about his bluffing
I got
range?
my shove because I'll be shoving here most likely. But because not only aces, kings, and queens are in his range, and
Yeah.
of course, like you said, like the big SX and hands like king queen because he opened he betted 200. So I'm just shoving here.
Yeah, I agree completely. But I do think this is a spot to be aware that I think that versus some regs, this can be a very good spot to flat. Because they're less likely to be stacking off that much with king queen, although they still stack off with king queen, but they have a significantly higher proportion of bluffs in this spot that they won't stack off with, and that they likely will stack off with on turns. If they're setting this board up like this, he's likely stacking off on basically every single turn if he's a reg, because he set the pot up perfectly. It's going to be like 400, 290. I mean, most regs will tend to see bet a little smaller, but either way, I think a lot of regs will stack off on a lot of turns in this spot, especially once we flat. It does kind of look like we have a drawing hand or peeling hand or something that might fold turns. So I think this is a spot to be decently aware that versus some regs it can be good to flat. But we definitely need to read that he has a lot of air in his range, and he's willing to barrel it off. Not a lot of regs are even willing to barrel off. They'll just fire a c-bet and then give up. And obviously versus them, we should just shove it and hope that they call it off with king queen. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In this case, it's a clear shove, get value, and that's fine when he folds. All right, so now we got aces. It's always fun to pick that up, and he limps. So we should be raising here. It's just an issue to what size. It's pretty close. I think raising to 60 here is fine, but I think given that we have such a strong hand, and that we really don't want to get any folds, I think I would probably raise like 50, or even maybe min raise. If we're shorter, I would certainly just min raise over his limp. But I think at this depth, probably something like raising to 50 is best. We really want something where he's priced in to call us, because we play so well versus in post. This isn't a hand like ace king. This isn't a hand where we don't want to give him a good price to flat, because when he flats and he hits a pair, he's going to do very well versus us. When he flats and hits a pair, he's screwed. We're getting even more value. It's going to take one of those top 10% or less flops for him to actually be ahead of us. And so he certainly doesn't have that kind of odds. He's certainly not, obviously we don't want to give him 10-1, but that's impossible. So I think this is a spot where you can consider even just min raising. You shouldn't be too worried about anything. And I do think that 60 is too big. This shallow especially. Deeper, I think we can get away with it just for a little bit extra value. It'll make it easier to stack off post. But we're 14.5 big blind, so it's not going to be an issue where we're going to have trouble getting stacks in post. Stacks are going to be easy to get in post. Basically bet and he shoves over us, or we check and he shoves often enough. It's just going to be really easy to get value out of pairs. So I would raise smaller. All right, 7-3 suited. Yeah, I'm certainly not open folding this. Now, whether we min raise or limp is a much closer question. I think your limp here is fine because we're suited and we have some connected value. I think a min raise is fine as well. I think they're going to be very close in expectation. We don't have great reads on his short stack game. Again, so far he's been loose, shorter, but I think that's likely a sample size issue. My default is to min raise fold here. He's been on the tight side overall, I think, in his game. Although I guess he's not really that tight. Like, he limps so much. He's actually playing decent hands in position. It's close. I think your limp here is fine. Uh, Especially since, he probably has some big leaks post. And yeah, again, it's pretty close whether we fold here, but yeah, I would fold here as well. If we had something a little bit stronger, maybe certainly 7-5 suited, I would still flat. 7-4 is on the border, but yeah, 7-3 suited, we can just fold. It's not going to hit enough flops. So I just shove here over limp, this shallow. This is one of these spots where even though he may be limp trapping, because we're so shallow, and because our hand still is suited, has some equity, we can get away with shoving. And it's going to be certainly better than just giving up. But it's, than just folding. But obviously we don't have a choice of folding. It's hard to compute expectations checking back. It's hard to even approximate it. But I will say that shoving here is going to be at least half a small blind better than, folding if we had that option. And I think it's going to be hard to get much more than that post-flop out of position with this hand. Especially facing the fact that we know that his range is a little polar. It does have some stronger hands. It's going to be a little bit harder to play with against post-flop. So I would just shove this. I wouldn't shove this much deeper than we are now. Maybe 15, 15.5. I wouldn't shove it much deeper than that versus this guy because he limp traps. But versus a lot of players, we can shove this very, quite deep. Almost up to like 18 big blinds, we can still shove this. Because they will have so few limp traps compared to limp folds. Versus shoves especially. And it can make a lot of sense to shove with this kind of hand rather than raising not all in. Because a lot of the hands that the players will limp, like 18 to 12 big blinds nowadays, are middling hands. I mean, the Mayor's Revolution sort of in full force. Everyone loves limping their middling hands. And, when they limp their Jack 10 and you raise not all in with King 2, they're going to flat you. And they're in position with Jack 10 versus your King 2 suited. They're probably going to be doing better than you. They're definitely doing better than if they had folded. I mean, significantly better. And they're probably doing, very well versus you. And if we just shove, well, he's just going to fold. Either he folds his Jack 10 or he calls, and either way, we're really happy. If he's calling with Jack 10 and we have close to 60% equity, it's maybe a little short of 60% equity versus Jack 10 off, for instance. And if he folds, then we're also happy because he didn't flat it. So I would be shoving here. I don't like this check. I think it's a little bit too conservative. Again, I think, again, we do have a read that he limp traps, but we've seen him limp trap once, and that's it. And even if he's limp trapping 33% of the time, if that read is absolutely accurate, and a third of the time he's limp trapping, we're still fine shoving here. It's just we get so many folds still, and we're so shallow, and we still have equity versus his limp trapping range. So we should be shoving here. And as played, though, I would certainly be betting this flop. It's a little bit close to whether we want to bet just because we have showdown. But I bet on this kind of flop with almost all of my range. The reason being is just such a dry flop. We just get so many folds, and it helps us realize our equity. We are out of position, so, just because we have king high and we fold out hands that, we beat, that's not really enough reason, I think, not to bet. Folding out hands we beat is not such a bad thing when we're shallow, out of position, in this kind of limp pot, because it's going to be hard to fold them out later. And they do improve, once they improve, that is. All hands have quite a lot of equity versus King 2 here. And I do think that we can probably get better hands to fold as well if we intend to 2-barrel. It's fine to check here, though. I think we can check call as well. We do have King High. If we had a much weaker hand, if we had 2-3 or even 8-2, I would be certainly leading, just as a pure bluff. Because it's such a dry board, players don't play back enough. He's going to be hitting this flop so rarely. I mean, he's going to be hitting this flop something like 30, 40% of the time at most, depending on his limping range. And so, he's not going to play back nearly enough to not make us want to bet here, and make it certainly better than check folding. But yeah, here we do have king 2, so I don't mind check calling as well. And once we hit a 2, yeah, we should just value bet at this point. And that's a nice benefit as well to betting the flop, is we do get actually value still from worse hands. I mean, there still are a lot of hands that will call us on the flop that we are ahead of. Not talking about 7-5, but there's a decent amount of other, like, 7-8, even just random other overcards, like Jack-10, Queen-Jack. And, that's a good way to get value as well. So I do think that we should be betting this flop. It's not a clear-cut bet because we have king-high, but I still think it's worth making. But this turn is absolutely fine. We should be betting. It's pretty unlikely that we're going to get value any other way than betting here. And I don't think he's going to fold an ace-high or king-high at this point. So we can just get value. And still, again, folding out equity share when we're out of position is always fine. All right, king 8 suited. So this is a place where I think a lot of players start having some trouble with what to do with this kind of hand. We're 13.5 big blinds deep. Are we open shoving? Are we min-raise calling? Are we limping? It's a tough spot. And it is going to come down somewhat to reads. I think that if we have reads that villain, 3-bet shoves certainly wider than he calls open shoves, we should be probably min-raising to induce. But average villain doesn't actually do that. Average villain is not inducible, does not 3-bet shove that much. And so I probably wouldn't be min-raising in order to induce. Now, that doesn't mean that if we min-raise, I think we still have to probably call a shove 13.5 big blinds deep because we're just priced in. But we're not happy about it. It's not like we're trying to induce a wide range by min-raising. So I often actually just think that just open shoving here is best. The reason being is that there's a still good chance that we'll get called by worse King X here. Or get called by Queen Jack, Jack 10. I mean, there's still a lot of hands that can call. And the idea is that, even if they don't, even if Jack 10 off folds here, or let's say King 7 off folds here, well, that's not such a bad thing because it also means that there's a lot of other hands that are folded. Because if we min-raise, we're certainly getting flatted by Jack 10 and 10-9 and a lot of other hands that are going to do a pretty good job realizing their equity versus our hand. And so, versus those hands, we actually prefer a fold pre-flop than them flatting us. So I think by min-raising, we do open ourselves up a little bit to getting flatted. I do think that a lot of fish do flat a ton at this depth. So I think it does make a pretty good argument for open shoving. Especially since, again, fish tend to have wider call open shove ranges than 3-bet shove ranges. So if anything, we probably get a little bit more value by open shoving it. We get it in versus a little bit of wider range. And so, we're probably doing fine against that range anyway. So it's pretty close. I think all equities are close here. I wouldn't really limp here. I think it's too weak of a hand. Unless we have some specific reads that he, ISOs super wide. His physical ISO shoves, and we can, limp trap. It's not a terrible idea to limp trap this. King 8 is a decent trapping hand, but we do need ranges that are, 40%. We do need him to be, getting it in with at least 40% of hands. Often to want to limp trap a hand like this, or min-raise trap. So it's a pretty interesting hand. There's a lot of very interesting stuff going on at this 10 to 14 big blinds deep. I know it's something that we've been working on a lot in our sessions, Martin, so I won't bore you too much. But if it is something that I work on a lot in general with a lot of my students in one-on-one sessions, because it is such a complicated, I think, game, 7 to 14 big blinds deep. At the same time, it's a spot where you can get a ton of edge, a lot more edge than most people have. It's one of, I think, the spots where you can really improve your game the easiest and most effectively, because fish tend to have such exploitable tendencies at these depths. So in any case, I would probably just open shove. Min-raising's okay. We do have to call a shove here, I think. It's very close. I would have to IC-miser it. This is a good spot to just have your population database set up. Look at what 3-bet shove ranges you're looking at and compute, is this a call or not? Again, that's something, computing that kind of stuff, looking up your population tendencies. It's something that's a lot in my Math and Heads Up Sit and Goes video pack. And we talk about this kind of stuff. In this case, I mean, it's a close spot. I'm not going to go through it right now because it's not worth it. It is close. I'm pretty sure it's a call because we're suited. King 8 off is a fold. King 8 suited is a call. This is fine. But it is certainly close because we are behind a decent amount. But that's obviously the nice benefit, is that King 8 does do awesome versus any random spew. And this is a very surprising hand. I mean, this is basically a hand that we should note because it is very surprising. It's very surprising to have this kind of a type player that we haven't seen um, too much action from, randomly shoving 5-6 off. I mean, this is a terrible shove versus almost everyone. So, I mean, it's immediately profitable for us. I mean, this is why playing fish is profitable, because they'll randomly shove stuff like 5-6 off. This is almost never going to be a good shove. And if it is, there's a lot better shoves anyways. Uh, so yeah, it's bad, but and obviously he gets there, which is frustrating. But yeah, that does make our min raise call better. Obviously, if we know he's 3-bet shoving trash like this, King 8 suited is a snap call once we min raise. It's still pretty close to whether we should min raise. We still don't know he's shoving all of his trash like this. Obviously, if he's shoving 5-6 and everything better than 5-6, we should just min raise call King 8. It's clear. But obviously, fish aren't rational. And since they don't have rational ranges, they're not shoving everything above 5-6 just because they shove 5-6. He'll just randomly shove 5-6 sometimes, just based on his feel or his sense, I guess, of the dynamics. A lot of players are this kind of feel dynamic players, and so they'll just decide to shove 5-6, even though there are much better hands he could wait for and shove a much better range. Than and including 6-5 off is likely a mistake, no matter what the dynamics are. I would likely be flatting much more often 6-5 in his shoes than 3-betting it. But often, most of the time, it's a fold. So in any case, good game. We'll be back next time with more games. I've been trying to do a few more of these hand history reviews. I think that this is a great format for learning more and analyzing the spots better. Did you have any questions, Martin? Anything? Any last sort of thoughts? We can close up.
Oh no, I think that's the King 8 suited doesn't play so bad post flop to just open shove it.
Yeah, I mean it is close.
Like King 5 suited for sure, but King 8 suited, right? Very nice call.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It isn't so clear cut that King 8 suited doesn't play that bad. Plays that bad post. I still think it's very close. I've had very close numbers in my database at around this depth, like whether we prefer villain just folding or flatting us. I found that we marginally prefer villain folding, but I mean it depends a little bit on our specific villain. I mean if we have reads that our villain has terrible post, then you're absolutely right. I mean King 8 suited is going to be awesome post versus a very bad player. I think readless, I still lean a little bit towards shoving it, because again, like, I'm still not convinced that we really like getting flatted by some of those middling hands that would have folded otherwise. And at the same time, I still think that we get more value in a sense. Like, we get it in versus a wider range. Like, he's calling it off with Queen Jack. He's much more likely to get it in with King 7 or King 6 or King 5 when we open shove. But you're right, it's close. And especially 13.5 big blinds deep. There's still a decent amount of playability. I think if we were 11.5, it makes it much, much closer to just, open shove or mid-raise call when we have the read. But 13.5, you're right, that we still have some playability post-flop. And you're right, I mean, King 8 suit isn't so bad. It's definitely a close spot. I mean, I think that, the decision's very close, and I don't think yours is that bad. And I think, we do have a decent amount of reads that he's been doing some very weird stuff, that he's been playing not so well post. He overall has had some very strange ranges. So it does make it more likely that, first of all, he might spew 3-bet shove, which makes, obviously, min-raise calling better. And also he might just spew post-flop. I mean, it might be that, if he flats us with 5-6, he's going to get it in on this board with 5-6. And, we're pretty happy about that as well. He might just even open shove or do other stupid stuff that makes it really easy for us to get equity. So I think you're right. It's certainly not so clear cut. Again, I do tend to shove this readless, but it is on the close side. And you're right. Like, it's going to depend a lot on, how strong we think it is post flop versus our specific villain. And I think you're right that in this case, maybe I was a little bit hasty to say that it's a shove versus this guy. He has been doing some weird stuff. So probably min-raise calling is absolutely fine. And he has 3-bet shove does in the past as well, so it's not so, it's not like he's been that tight per se out of position. So yeah, I think it's fine. Certainly deeper, I would be min raising. I'm certainly not shoving this deeper than like 14 big blinds, anyways, ever. And certainly shallower, I think it gets closer again to to open shoving. I think 11.5 big blinds, certainly 10 big blinds, we should certainly be open shoving because we will get strictly more value. I mean, that's when people will call you off with king 2 off. We'll call you shove with king 2 off, but they would have flatted you or folded it otherwise. But yeah, good question. All right. I hope that you guys found this beneficial. Thanks for submitting these hands, Martin. I really appreciate it. And good luck to everyone. This was Coffeeyay. If you guys have any questions or want more information regarding my coaching or any of the video packs that I've done, just send me an email, coffeeyay@gmail.com. Cheers, guys.